Kesubos Daf is the last daf in the 7th parak, Parak Hamadir, and it will take us to the end of the parak. The entire daf is in the parak. Now it contains two mishnayos, and it's all about the topic of what happens when the man has mum. The Gemara will first speak about what the halachos are, when are they grounds for divorce, when do we force the man to divorce his wife because she cannot be expected to live with a man with a mum like that. And the Gemara will get into the specifics of the mumim, what's considered a major mum, what's a minor mum, are there any cures for these mumim, and then the Gemara will have some agadata and we'll end off the parak. So, by way of introduction, when a man has a mum is very different than when a woman has a mum. When the woman has a mum, the question is, did the man make a mekach tois? Did he enter the marriage with a mistaken assumption of who she was? She's really someone else, and therefore it's invalid. Or did it happen after, and it's his fault? It's his problem. He already is married to her, and therefore it's his responsibility that she got the mum. When it's the woman who has to deal with a man who has a mum, it's a very different question. There is no question of did she make a mistaken purchase, or is it something that happened to her possession? He's not her purchase, and he's not her possession. She didn't purchase him, and she doesn't own him. There is no issue of is it a mekach tois or is it nestapcha sedeyu. The only issue is, can she be expected to handle it or not? If she can be expected to handle it, then she should stay married to him. If she can't be expected to handle it, then he has to divorce her and give her a ksuba. Now, the only possibility that it makes a difference that if it was before the marriage was that if it was before the marriage, then possibly she was aware of it and she accepted it. She agreed knowingly to get into this situation. She'll therefore have less grounds to say, I want out now. So the Gemara begins with we begin with a Mishnah, which has a simple machlokes. And the Gemara's machlokes is what the case of the Mishnah is. So the Mishnah says, if the man has a mum, so according to Tanna Kama, she's stuck, she can't get out of it. When Rav Shimon ben Gamliel, if it's a major mum, then she could. If it's a small mum, then she cannot. She has to stay with him. So Gemara wants to know, are we talking about where this mum existed before the wedding or after the wedding? So the Gemara says that according to Rav Yehuda, it's where the mum was there, it came and it arrived after the wedding. Kal v'chomer, if it was there before the wedding, she has to stay with him. At least according to the Tanna Kama, according to Rav Shimon ben Gamliel, a small mum, because she was aware of it. And if she was aware of it, then she has far less of an excuse to say she wants out. Now, according to Rav Chia, we're talking about where the mum was there before the wedding. And it's possible, however, that in a case where the mum came after the wedding, she could say, if this would have been here before, I never would have gone into this marriage in the first place. Now, the Gemara says, according to Rav Shimon ben Gamliel, we said there's a difference between a big mum and a small mum. So that's a kasha on Rav Chia, because if we're talking about the mum that was there before the wedding, so what difference does it make if it was a big mum or a small mum? She agreed. Right? She was aware that it was there and she agreed to it. So what's the difference? So the Gemara says no. There is a logic to say that she thought she could withstand it. She thought she would be able to deal with the situation created by this mum. And now that she's actually in it, she sees that it's too hard, and that's why a big mum, we would allow her to get out of it and we'll force the man to give her the get. Now, it says in Gemara, we defined a big mum. So what's a big mum? The Gemara says that Rav Shimon ben Gamliel explained in a Mishnah, what he meant. If he's blind, or if he's missing a hand, or if he has a shattered leg. Now, the Gemara says that Rav Yechanan says, Rav Abba Bar Yaakov, close Rav Yechanan says that the halacha is like Rav Shimon ben Gamliel. And Rava asked, Rava said in the name of Rav Nachman, the halacha is like the Chachamim. So we're asking, why does Rav Yechanan have to have a special statement where he says the halacha is like Rav Shimon ben Gamliel? We have Rabbi Chana says the name of Rav Yechanan that the halacha is always like Rav Shimon ben Gamliel, with only 3 exceptions. So why do we have to say here again, the halacha is like him? We said the halacha is always like him. This is a redundant statement. Now, what are the 3 exceptions? They are Erev, Tzidon, and Raya Achrona. Gemara is all over Shas, referring to an Erev, referring to a get, a divorce, and a Tzidon. And are you allowed to bring a proof after the court has already reached a decision? Can you reopen the discussion? Anyway, so the answer to the Gemara's question, the Gemara says, is that there is 2 different Amirayim as to what Rabbi Yechanan said. According to one, Rabbi Yechanan said, halacha like Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel all the time except in these 3. And according to the other one, Rabbi Yechanan never said that. And therefore you have to list wherever the halacha is like Rav Shimon ben Gamliel. And this is one of the cases. All right, now we begin to our next Mishnah, which starts listing Mumin. And it talks about the ones that you do force him to give her a get and let her out of the marriage. Obviously, in the opinion of Rav Shimon ben Gamliel, but we'll have other opinions further along the Mishnah. So the Mishnah begins. The Mishnah says these are the mumen which you would force him to give her a get. One is if he's mukashchin. That means that he has skin lesions all over the body. The Gemara will discuss 20 different types of skin lesions. Somebody who has polyphus, the Gemara says that's either a smell coming from his nose or from his mouth. Mekamates, the Gemara will explain that also. Somebody who's collecting excrement for a living. Mitzaref Nechoshes we'll discuss it as well. That's a coppersmith. A vorsi is a tanner, somebody who tans hides. Now, all these things, the Tanakama says, is whether they existed before the marriage or they came and they began after the marriage. Rabbi Meir says, even if he specifically made a condition and said, this is what I'm going to do, or this is what I am, and they spoke it out before the wedding, she could still change her mind. She could say, I thought I could handle it, and apparently I found out now that I cannot handle it. Now, Chachamim said, if she's mekabel on herself, except for mukashchin, she has to be mekabel all of them, she has to deal with it, she can't get out of it. The mukashchin is different because he can't be with her physically, it causes his flesh to break apart by being in the physical contact that's needed as part of a marriage experience. Now, it says there was an incident that happened in Sidon with a tanner. He died, and his wife held even to his brother, who was a tanner as well. And Chachamim said, here, she doesn't have to continue. She has the right to say, your brother, I was able to withstand, but for you, the Yavam, I cannot withstand this mum, it's too much. All right, now the Gemara begins. The Gemara says, first of all, what is polyphos? Rabbi Yehuda says in the name of Shmuel, it's smell coming from it's an odor coming from the nose. There's a brayso that says that it's coming from the mouth. The Gemara says that Rav Asi has it the opposite, and he has a simon to remember, because Shmuel, a pasuk pume mikuli pirkin, Shmuel never stopped learning, which the phrase for that is that his mouth never stopped. So Shmuel is the one that says that it comes from the mouth, according to his version. All right, now what's a mekamitz? So the Gemara says mekamitz is somebody who gathers the excrement of a dog, whereas a kasha from a Mishnah that says mekamitz is a tanner. The Gemara says, what do you mean? That doesn't fit in our Mishnah. Our Mishnah listed a tanner and a mekamitz separately, so obviously mekamitz is not the same as the tanner. The Gemara says that's not a kasha. It could be that there's a large-scale tanner and a small-scale tanner, which is called a collector. That's just a mekamitz. The Rishonim explained that gathering the dung of the dog was part of the tanning process, so it could very well be referring to a tanner, just somebody who does it on a much smaller scale. Now, so we still have, though, Akasha on Rav Yehuda. Rav Yehuda had defined it as somebody who gathers the dung, and the Mishnah said that it's a tanner. So the Gemara answers that is a machlekes tanaim. One Tana says that a mekamitz is a tanner, and the other one says that it's one who gathers the dung of the dog. All right, now we go on to the next thing. We had the coppersmith and the tanner. So the Gemara says, what's a coppersmith? That's a machlekes as well. Rav Ashi says somebody who hammers sheets of copper to make kettles. Rabbi Chana says that somebody who mines copper from ore. We learned the brayso just like Rabbi Chana. The definition of mitzvah for somebody who mines copper from the ore. Now, all these obviously are unpleasant jobs and leave the man in an unpleasant way, and his wife could say, I can't handle it. Now, the Gemara goes on to talk about other situations where we would potentially force somebody to give his wife a get. So Rav says somebody who says, I don't plan on giving her any parnasa, I don't plan on feeding her, and I'm just not interested in fulfilling that obligation, so Allah says he has to give her a ksuba. Rabbi Lazar said this over in front of a Shmuel. Shmuel said, feed barley to Elazar. This doesn't make any sense. Instead of forcing him to give a get, we should force him to feed her. He says he doesn't want to feed her, so, force it. And once you're forcing it, you may as well force him to follow the rules. So Gemara says that Rav did not, the reason that Rav didn't hold that way is because if you force him to feed her, that's well and good, but she still has to live with him. and he's obviously not a person she wants to live with. You can't expect a person to live together with a snake, and you can't really force him to feed her all the time anyway. It's too much to force. You'll force him once or twice, but like can't force him on a continuous basis. That's not a continuous solution. The only continuous solution is if he divorces her and let her go marry somebody else. Now, the Gemara says when Rabbi Zera went up, he found Rabbi Binyamin Bar Yefes, who was sitting and saying this sugya named Rabbi Yechanan, and he said, "Oh, you're saying that you should force him to give the get." On that, they fed the barley to Elazar in Bavel, and he said that that's the wrong halacha. They said that you should force him to feed her instead of forcing him to give the get. All right, now the Gemara talks about other situations in which you force a get. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yehuda says, name of Rav Asi, you don't force a get except in a situation where the marriage is possible. Where he says of the Shmuel, and he gave examples, and Alman to a Kohen Hagadol, Grusha, Chalutza, marry a Kohen Hedyot, Mamzeres, or in a sin, or in a sin to Yisrael, Abbas Yisrael, to in a sin, or to a Mamzer. All these cases are an issue deraisa this marriage, and therefore you force them to separate. However, if you have a couple that's married for 10 years without children, don't force them to get divorced. Now, Rav Tachlifa Bar Aviv said the name of Shmuel. Even in that case, you do force them to get divorced. So now the Gemara says, well, we have a kasha from our Mishnah. Our Mishnah listed a number of situations where you force somebody to get divorced. It did not list a case where they're married for 10 years. That clearly indicates that that's not on the list. So the Gemara says, well, what do you mean? What about all the other things? What about all the Yisuri Deraisa? It didn't list those in our Mishnah either. No, the Gemara says that's not a kasha. It could be our Mishnah was only listing Yisuri Derabanan and not Yisuri Deraisa. However, it's only listing that is the Rabbanon reasons for divorce and not the Deraisa reasons for divorce. However, you are saying the Rabbanon reason. So your thing about the 10 years without kids is not in the Mishnah, so that shows that that's not on the list, that it's not true. Whereas it's not necessarily. Could be that the list is only things where you force the guy with his stake. But this 10 years is where you just talk him into it. You explain to him, listen, you have a mitzvah pruvu. She's obviously not able to provide you with kids, or at least the union between the two of you is no good. So you go marry somebody else. She'll go marry someone else. And let's see if it works that way. Someone says, no, that's not called forcing. We have a pasuk in Mishlei that says, "V'dvarim lo yivasar eved ki yavin ve'ein ma'aneh." Don't force somebody with words. So Kemba is referring to. So says Gemara, no. All right. So I'll tell you a different reason that's not listed in the Mishnah, even though it's true. The Mishnah is talking about situations in which she has the right to force a divorce. If she doesn't want a divorce, you don't have to. Over here, we force them even against her will because they have a mitzvah. So even if she wants to be moichel, we still say no. She has to go through with it. Now, the Gemara asks, that's not correct. It's not correct to say that in our Mishnah, it's only if she wants the divorce that we'll force it, but if she agrees, we will let them stay. It's not true, because Mukashchin is on the list, and in Mukashchin, she has to agree, because even if she doesn't want to, because it's dangerous for him, the Tashmish could force his flesh to fall apart. So the Gemara says, no, there's a solution. They could agree that they're going to stay married, and they won't have Tashmish, and they're going to have Eidim with them all the time, so there won't be Yichud, so that it's not going to happen, and therefore it would be safe. So there is a potential way for them to stay together. However, in the case of not married for 10 years, you do have to force them to separate. Right, now the Gemara is going to go into the details of Shchin and other diseases. Somewhere close to Bryce that says, Rav Yosi says, an old man from the elders of Yerushalayim told me there are 24 different types of Shchin, and on all of them, the Tashmish is difficult. But the people who have the disease, the type called Ra'asan, Tashmish for them is the worst. What causes it? So the Gemara says, the Brisa says somebody who has bloodletting and then he's Mishamish right afterwards, so his children will be weak. If him and his wife both had bloodletting and have Tashmish right afterwards, then the children will have Ra'asan. Says Rav Papa, it's only true if they didn't eat anything between the bloodletting and the Tashmish, but if they ate something, it's not going to happen. What does Ra'asan look like? So the eyes are constantly tearing. There's dripping from the nostrils. He has saliva flowing from the mouth. And he always has a bunch of flies surrounding him. Now, what is the cure? So then they have to do a surgery. Apparently, Ra'asan is caused by a parasite that inhabits the space between the skull and the membrane around the brain. You have to do a surgery, open the skull, and get it out. So the Gemara says, how are you going to do the surgery? How are you going to get the skull open? How are you going to get it out? So the Gemara proposes the following approach. So we need to make a mixture of the following things. You take a type of grass called puliol or pennyroyal, and you take the luda, that is a chemical called wormwood. It's the lana that you find in the psukim. Then you take the shells of a nut tree, meaning you scrape the bark of the tree, and you take scrapings from skin of an animal. Then you take a flower called chavatzeles or klil malka. Then you take a shell that you have on a hard date, which is raw, and it's red. You take all these things, crush them up together, cook them together, and then you take the person who has rasa and you put him in a house with marble walls to block drafts. If you don't have marble walls, then you have to have bricks that are 3.5 layers thick. Then you take the potion and you pour 300 cups of it on his head until his head becomes soft, and then you open up the skull. And there you'll find this parasite there. He has 4 legs, so you have to first detach his legs from the membrane. So you put hadas leaves, 1 under each leg, and then you can pull him out, and you burn him in a fire, otherwise he'll go back in on his own. Now, more about Rasan. Rabbi Yochanan said, avoid the flies of Rasan. Rabbi Zera would not sit downwind from him. This is all in order to prevent becoming sick. Rabbi Lazar would not go into the tent with him at all. Rabbi Ravasi would not eat in an egg that came from the neighborhood of somebody who had Rasan. Not only other foods, which don't have a hard shell, but even an egg that has a shell. Now the Gemara talks about Rishu ben Levi. Lengthy story about Rishu ben Levi. Some rest of Rishu ben Levi was not afraid of Bali Rasan. He would go near with them, he would stick with them, and he would teach Torah to them. He would say, Ayalas tehuvim v'yalas chein. Just like the Torah gives chein to those who learn it, it will certainly protect them from anything. In order, because no one else is willing to learn with them, he went to the people at Rasan and he provided this for them. Now, when he himself was time for him to die, so the Vezin Shalmaila said to the Malach HaMaves, the angel of death, go give Rabbi Shubin Levi his last wish, and then it's time to go. So he went and he appeared to Rabbi Shubin Levi, and Rabbi Shubin Levi said, I would like you to show me my place in Gan Eden. He said, okay. And as they were on the way, he said, Yeshua ben Levi said to him, give me your knife, because I'm afraid that you're going to scare me along the way. So he gave him the knife to hold. Now, the knife is what he used to take people's neshamas. When they got to Gan Eden, so the Malach picked him up to see over the wall and showed him his place, and he went and he jumped inside over the wall into Gan Eden itself. He made a shvua. They said, I'm not ever going to leave. However, the Malach HaMavis did catch him by his cloak, trying to pull him out. And that was a violation of his shvua. So what are you supposed to do now? So they went to Hashem for a psak, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu paskin that if he ever had a neder or a shvua that he was matir, then it will be matir this one as well, and will allow him to go out. However, otherwise he could stay. And it turned out that he didn't have, and therefore he was able to stay. However, Malach HaMavis would like my knife back, and he said he didn't want to give it. But a voice came out of heaven and said, give the knife back. The world cannot survive without being able to kill certain people. It's part of the Bria, so give him the knife back. So he did. Now he went into Gan Eden, then Rabbi Shua ben Levi, and Eliyahu was calling out, make place for the son of Levi, make place for the son of Levi. And when he found Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, he was sitting on 13 golden chairs. And he said, are you the son of Levi? He said, yes. He said, was there ever a rainbow in your days? He said, yes. He said, if so, then you're not really the son of Levi. His merit, they would not have had any rainbows. And then it says the Gemara, it's not true. There was no rainbow in his days, but he did not want to show off. He wanted to speak out of humility. The Gemara says that Chanina bar Papa was friends with the Malach HaMavis. It was time for him to die. They said, go give him his last wish. He went to him, and he appeared to him, and he said, give me 30 days so I can chazer my learning. Like it says, Ashamisha Balkan Tamudi Biyoda, make sure you know your stuff before you get up to Shemayim. So he gave him 30 days. After 30 days, he came in, he said, show me my place in Gan Eden. So he said, okay, I'll show you. He said, give me... Then knife because he scared me on the way. No, the Malach HaMavos wasn't being fooled twice and said, "Oh, you want to do the same thing as your friend? I'm not going to do that." So he said, "Bring me a Sefer Torah and show me if there's anything in it that I did not keep." Meaning to say that I deserve to have the same right and to go into Gan Eden alive. So the Malach HaMavos said, "You didn't learn with the Bali Rasan. You did not go and be Isaac in a Torah with those people who had no one else to learn with them." It says the Gemara, even though he didn't do that, when he died, he still had a column of fire that separated between him and everyone else, and we know that is a special merit that you only have to one or two people in every generation. So you see that he certainly was a great person. Anyway, the Talmid Chachamim weren't able to get to him to do Kfura, so Rabbi Alexander, he said, do for the covenant of the Chachamim, that they shouldn't be embarrassed that they are less than you, but the flame didn't move. So he said, do before the covenant of your father, so we should be able to do real Kfura, and the flame didn't move. Do for your own covenant, so we should be able to do Hespedim and everything, and then it did go away and allow them to take care of him. Says Abaye, this still shows that he was great, that he was different than everybody else, who there was something in the Torah that they did not fulfill, but he fulfilled everything. Said Ravad Bar Masna, to exclude somebody like you, that you didn't have a makla, you didn't have a fence around your roof. Says the it's not true. He did have a fence around his roof. Abaye, just at the moment that Ravad Bar Masna passed by, it had fallen down, the wind had blown it over. Now, the Gemara concludes the parak by saying what Rabbi Chanina says. Why is it that there's no Bali Rasan in Bavel? So the Gemara says because they eat radishes and they drink beer made from hizmi, made from a thorny hizmi bush. Rechan says why are there no mitziron, people with tzaras? Why don't you have any of them in Bavel? Because they eat radishes and drink beer, and they wash in the Pras River.